Coming up on 5 Minute News. As missiles hit Poland, President Biden calls emergency meeting. Donald Trump announces White House candidacy despite criminal probes. And cities with net zero promises fall short on tracking. It's Wednesday, November 16. I'm Anthony Davis. President Joe Biden called an emergency meeting of G7 and NATO leaders in Indonesia this morning for consultations after NATO ally Poland said a Russian-made missile killed 2 people in the eastern part of its country near the Ukraine border. Biden, who was awoken overnight by staff with the news of the missile explosion, called Polish President Duda early this morning to express his deep condolences for the loss of life. The US president promised full US support for and assistance with Poland's investigation and reaffirmed the United States' ironclad commitment to NATO. A statement from the Polish Foreign Ministry identified the missile as being made in Russia, but Poland's President Duda was more cautious about its origin, saying that officials did not know for sure who fired it or where it was made. He said it was most probably Russian-made, but that was still being verified. If confirmed, it would be the first time since the invasion of Ukraine that a Russian weapon came down on a NATO country. The foundation of the NATO alliance is the principle that an attack against one member is an attack on them all. The UN Security Council also planned to meet today for a previously scheduled meeting on the situation in Ukraine. In their statements, Poland and NATO used language that suggested they were not treating the missile blast as a Russian attack, at least for now. Former President Donald Trump said on Tuesday that he will mount a third White House campaign, launching an early start to the 2024 contest. The announcement comes just a week after a disappointing midterm showing for Republicans and will force the party to decide whether to embrace a candidate whose refusal to accept defeat in 2020 sparked an insurrection and pushed American democracy to the brink. Trump spoke for over an hour, complaining about grievances to an audience of several hundred supporters, club members, and gathered press in a chandeliered ballroom at his Mar-a-Lago club, where he stood flanked by more than 30 American flags and banners bearing his Make America Great Again slogan. Another campaign is a remarkable turn for any former president, much less one who made history as the first to be twice impeached, and whose term ended with his supporters violently storming the Capitol in a deadly bid to halt the peaceful transition of power on January 6, 2021. Trump enters the race in a moment of political vulnerability. He hoped to launch his campaign in the wake of resounding GOP midterm victories, fueled by candidates he elevated during this year's primaries. Instead, many of those candidates lost, allowing Democrats to keep the Senate and leaving the GOP with a path only to a bare majority in the House. Trump is launching his candidacy amid a series of escalating criminal investigations, including several that could lead to indictments. They include the probe into dozens of documents with classified markings that were seized by the FBI from Mar-a-Lago and ongoing state and federal inquiries into his efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. Trump's candidacy poses profound questions about America's democratic future. The final days of his presidency were consumed by a desperate effort to stay in power, undermining the centuries-old tradition of a peaceful transfer. And in the 2 years since he lost, Trump's persistent and baseless lies about widespread election fraud have eroded confidence in the nation's political process. More than half of cities with pledges to reach net zero emissions have no plan for how they'll track and report progress, an analysis published on Tuesday said. The assessment, conducted by the research consortium Net Zero Tracker, adds to growing concern that non-state actors, including companies and cities, are using net zero commitments to mislead or confuse consumers, investors, and policymakers about how they combat global warming. A United Nations high-level expert group last week issued guidelines for how to avoid greenwashing on net zero pledges. The new analysis finds that few non-state actors are in clear compliance. Of the 1,156 publicly listed companies, regions and cities that have so far made net zero pledges, up from 907 a year ago, many are little more than vague commitments or proposals, the report said. Companies were doing better, with over three-quarters having some plan in place to track progress, though the report cautioned that a substantial fraction remained without any public transparency on their plans to decarbonise. You can subscribe to 5 Minute News on YouTube with your preferred podcast app. Ask your smart speaker or enable 5 Minute News as your Amazon Alexa flash briefing skill. Subscribe, rate and review online at 5minute.news. 5 Minute News is an Evergreen podcast covering politics, inequality, health and climate, delivering independent, unbiased and essential world news daily.